Aloha and welcome to Wind in Her Hair. I'm Anna, your host. And today I have basically a marriage professional on, Dr. Lee Baucom. Sorry. And he is the creator of many programs. He's written many books, as Save the Marriage is one of the ones that really caught my eye. And he has an app called the Unpause app. He's been married for over 25 years, right, Mr. Lee?
39 at this point, almost 39.
What? 39 years? So obviously you know a thing or two about how to not just stay in a marriage, but how to live in a fulfilling, satisfying marriage. And we're going to dive into all of that. But tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So now we'll be 39 years in August. We've got two adult kids. And I started my career as a marriage therapist who got frustrated with how ineffective marriage therapy
Mm,
actually is on helping marriages.
amen.
Yeah, so we can talk some about why that is, but unfortunately, that still is the number one jumping off point for a lot of people. So that led me down this path of not just saying what's wrong with marriage therapy, but how can people actually find help for their marriage? And that's what led way back in 98, 99 is when I was writing it, so way last century, of the Save the Marriage system. And that went online in 99 and has been used by people around the world. But then I started backfilling, like, where are the other problems? Like, what if there's an affair? Can you recover from
Mm,
that? And so I wrote a book about that. People don't always understand where the problems are. And so
mhm.
I wrote some about that. And one of my core pieces is that the real problem with how marriages get into problems. So first, we'll do a little footnote. I'm not talking about people who find a toxic person that they have found themselves with, right? That category. But unfortunately, the common kind of ordinary unhappiness that I see in marriages comes from this central issue I call the pause button marriage, which is what Unpause Your Marriage app. Lots of resources that I've created basically because I kept seeing places where there wasn't help, and people in a marriage crisis need a roadmap. Been my career of building the roadmaps.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I was just taking some notes on my phone because I have a few questions I want to ask you, but I'm also
Sure.
adding some questions. So you started down this road because you couldn't find quality marriage therapy.
I went and was trained as an individual therapist and then found myself interested in systems. And a marriage is a system, and families are systems. And also, so are small businesses and communities and other places. So, systems began to be what I enjoyed working with. So, I had the background with individual, and then I branched over to the systems approach and specialized in working with couples. And I was getting frustrated because the way you learn to be a therapist is by doing therapy and being supervised by somebody who is more experienced in that. And I kept going, what is wrong with this? I'm working with couples the way I've been taught to, and I'm watching and it's not working. And so then I stepped back and said, okay, somebody's done some research on this.
Mhm.
And when I dug out the research, it was heartening in the sense that I realized it wasn't the therapist, it was the approach that was the problem. And that approach is the common approach for this. And there are some other structural problems that come in. But basically, just to get to the statistics, 50% of people who go to therapy still end up divorced. 10 to 15%, depending on the study, reported it helped. And that's what led me to switch and do 3 years training as a coach to bring in. Still seeing people in my office, but I was already functioning as a coach. In fact, that was my reality check.
Right.
I read an article about coaching and went, that's how I do things. And my poor wife, who was watching me
Mhm.
write my dissertation after all these years of study and work, she said, what are you going to do? I'm like, I guess I'll go study coaching. And so I did that and started looking for what worked. And that's
Mhm.
where that approach, the Save the Marriage approach, came from.
I love that. So you kind of moved from therapy basically to coaching. And I do get that
Yeah.
question a lot. Am I a therapist or a coach? And this is how I explain it. Therapy is more dealing with the past, right? Your
Yeah.
past trauma. And therapists will sit there and listen to you vent and get everything off your chest. And do they give you homework? Maybe. Coaching is more future focused, like setting goals and the coach taking your hand and basically walking you from point A to point B to help you accomplish those goals and keep you accountable. And that's why I love coaching because I see the transformation
Mhm.
and the progress. Whereas therapy, my ex-husband and I went to therapy and we ended up getting a divorce. I noticed actually on your website is that you can help people save marriages even if only one person is willing to do the work. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Let me say that I do not believe that one person can ultimately save a marriage. I do believe one person can start the process and start building the relationship and invite their spouse into the connection. And that's the distinction. If you go to marriage therapy and show up by yourself, the therapist is going to go, "We can't do marriage therapy." Relationship coaching, marriage coaching, I can do it
Mhm.
with one person because I can coach them on how to interact differently, how to approach it differently. That's why a system is built on pieces. And if you change one of the, it changes the system. I often have people say when they read that line, they say, "Well, don't you think it takes two to tango?" And my response is, "Yeah, and you're already doing that. You're already tangoing. It just
Mhm.
doesn't sound like it's going the way you want it to. The dance not getting you where you want to. So maybe you change the dance. Maybe you change the
Mhm.
steps that you're
Yeah.
dancing. And if you change the steps that you're dancing, often it changes how the other person is dancing. And so you have an impact."
Only one person cannot successfully restore a marriage, but this is the key point, is that when you humble yourself, which means you can't have an ego. I think this is the core problem in most marriages, is the root of pride. And so if you can humble yourself, go into a conflict asking, where did I go wrong? That is
Right.
huge. Most people don't enter conversations asking, where did I go wrong? How can I do better? I think that I could have listened better. And owning and just saying, this is where I messed up, it immediately brings down the walls and softens hearts, and emotions are contagious, right? So the other person feels your humility. It's almost like a game, like, okay, wait, let me figure out what I did wrong. It's a heart issue. And like you said, they're fine at communicating, but they're not receiving it because there's pride, there's ego, they have hardened hearts, and they just don't want to hear it. They don't want to get feedback from their spouse because there's resentment, bitterness, contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness.
What you're describing is the fact that when marriages are ego based, like me versus you, opposed to seeing it as a we, like we are in this, are a
Mhm.
team. And if you're a team, or if you view it as a team, it's either a functional team or it's a dysfunctional team. And if it's you versus me, it's dysfunctional. But if you want to be a successful team, you recognize that it's not about being right. It's about how do you build this, and that's the ego drops away when you're going, okay, how do we move forward? A lot of people tell me, in fact, I've never had someone say they like conflict, but I have a lot of people who are just like, I do not like conflict. My thing is, conflict is inevitable in a relationship, but how you treat it is different. If conflict is, I'm going to win this, that is dangerous. That's the ego coming out, going, I've got to be right. Versus how do we use conflict to further our relationship, to build our relationship, because we have two different perspectives. Conflict doesn't have to be on fire. And those things you pointed out, all the way to stonewalling, are really symptoms of the disconnection that has happened. And so instead of people addressing the disconnection, they try to do communication techniques or something that will detoxify the conflict. And the conflict is toxic because it's about winning.
So true. We answered my first question. If one person can save a marriage by changing themselves, it's almost like it becomes like a snowball effect. They see the humility in you. You're willing to be more patient, work on yourself, change your ways. And it's kind of like they're either in or they're not. If only one person is willing to build the marriage, how does that work?
This is my observation about that pause button. That's when it happens. So,
Mhm.
couples, let me preface this with where I was doing my practice. If you were getting married in 7 of the major places of faith that people were using, they had to come to my office for 3 visits before they could get married. That was the ministers wanted to make sure that people were as prepared as possible. And so I was doing the premarital work for those
Mhm.
places. And 3 visits was enough for me to get to know them and to punch some holes in their illusion that everything was already okay. So let's talk about why that is. I would often say to them, because my job was, I mean, in some ways, to pick a fight, to prove that they had some places they needed to look at, to examine, because they would come in armored up like, we're good, we've got this. And so I
Mm.
would simply ask them, if I walk down the road and I meet somebody and say, "Hey, what are the chances of a marriage succeeding?" Almost everybody knows that it's about 50-50. It's a little better than that, but let's call it roughly that. So we know that fact. And I would say, why do you think that you've already beat the odds? If you know it's 50-50, why do you think that you've got it to walk down that aisle
Mhm.
and say, yep, for the rest of my life, I'm with this person? They would say, because we've got real love. Not because they told me how they had structured things or thought through things or created a plan or anything else, is we've got real love. And the subtext of that is the 50% who were
Mhm.
divorced didn't have real love. And so that's the illusion that people walk in with, which meant that they were resistant to really exploring a lot of what might come their way in a marriage. So here's what happens: people meet this person, they get to know them, they fall in love, and they go, hey, let's build this relationship together for life. And they have a short ceremony. It's incredibly short to go in single and come out married and go, okay, now we go do
Mhm.
life. And they believe they've already got it. So they've got the momentum that carries them a while. But what they miss is the fact that there's a decision that's often made. Like, now that we've got this nailed down, now that we've got this settled, now we have to do these other things like parenting, like career, like
Mhm.
dealing with aging
Finance,
parents,
yeah. Mhm.
all those things. We're going to have to deal with that. So let's hit the pause button on our marriage and we'll get back to us when we have more time.
Mm.
That's the pause button. And you think you've got this nailed down, but those habits of connection become habits of disconnection. And disconnection is painful for humans. That's a
Mhm.
need that we have.
So true.
And the more disconnected you become, the more hostile the relationship becomes. And
Mhm.
so the arc of connection, if you don't navigate it at that point where it could continue to arc upward, starts to arc downward to the arc of disconnection. And it's motivated by the distance that's in there. So then the disrespect all the way down to disdain comes from that process. Unless you change it along the way and go, hey, this is not where we need to be. Let's
Mhm.
arc out of here. In your description, it sounds like you were trying to find a way to break that downward arc,
Mhm.
and your husband was at a point of going, "Yeah, I've disconnected."
Right. But the thing is that he was never connected to begin with. The attachment styles, that's what I teach in my coaching program. And he was a dismissive avoidant. 17 years ago, when we got married, I didn't know anything about attachment styles,
Mhm.
narcissism, alcoholism, addiction, nothing. I wasn't really raised around that I knew of. And so I entered this marriage having no idea what I was signing up for. And month after month, I kept asking, why is there no emotional connection between us? Like, he doesn't want to talk about dreams or our future or plans. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what was happening. And when I educated myself and I went to Al Anon and I hired my own life coach, I realized, oh my goodness, like, I'm not with somebody else who wants to build at all, who will never really be able to have a connection with anybody unless he heals
Mhm.
his addiction to alcohol and his dismissive avoidant attachment style. And he was oblivious to it, in denial, and had no reason to seek help. If a relationship is a system, which I love, and some people might roll their eyes at it because a relationship should be organic and romantic and etc. Well, that's why most relationships fail, because a business has a system, the government has a system. It seems like most things in this world, especially if you want them to be successful and long lasting, have systems. So
Mm.
why shouldn't a relationship or a marriage have a system?
In fact, when you said organic, everything that we look around, your body is a system, how it works together. If you look
Mhm.
outside, those are all systems. You can't not be part of systems. I remember back in biology, they talked about this cycle and this cycle and this
Mhm.
cycle. Those are all systems. And if something breaks in the cycle, it's pretty
Mhm.
deadly to that biological system. So a systems view is not non organic. A system view includes organic. Now, some of those things that we named, like businesses, are a bit different of a system, but they still operate on the fact that there is a process involved. And
Mhm.
anytime there's a process, there is a system in place.
Mhm.
And you can't not have a system. So a lot of times people will say, I don't have a system. And my response is, that is a system. It's just not a particularly productive system,
Right.
because if you
Mhm.
don't think you have a system, you're stumbling through everything and it's not getting you the results you want.
Hmm.
One of the systems viewpoints that comes to us from actually the business world would say that your system is perfectly designed to give you the results you're getting right now. And so if you don't like the results you're getting, you might want to step back and ask the question, how do I need to change this system?
It's like people who say they don't have a routine. Well, yeah, you
Yeah.
do. It just is that specific routine that's not
Yeah.
really getting the results that you need. So, if a relationship is a system, I remember I asked you this question and you started talking about how people get to this place in the first place is by they push the pause button. And I see this with my clients that they push the pause button on the emotional safety aspect of their relationship with their wife. Number one, they don't know how to give it to her. So they just
Mhm.
think that by providing for her, giving her the vacations, the cars, the bags, all that stuff is going to make up for the emotional safety. And what I'm teaching them is if you do not give her emotional safety, emotional depth, your marriage will fail. It'll turn into the four horsemen of the apocalypse that John Gottman teaches about, which I love. So, what are the most common invisible rules couples are operating under that are quietly destroying the relationship when it comes to their non system?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one that I see, and I've talked about this several times on different conversations, is the divide and conquer theory.
Hmm.
And they believe that they'll just go to their separate corners, right?
Hmm.
And so I just recently I was talking to someone. I said, okay, you realize that that's a misuse of the analogy because divide and conquer was what you did to the enemy, not to yourselves. The army was supposed to
Hmm.
stay together, but you divide the enemy so that you can take them down piece by piece. So this is still how do you work together as a team? But many times couples go into their silos. When you do
Hmm.
that, you're living parallel lives. So
Ooh.
that's one. The second is that when people hit the pause button, I see them make some switches in how they go about things. So if you're building a connection with somebody, you're building a rapport with them, and you're deepening the rapport.
Hmm.
And the shortcut people try to do is they do reporting instead of rapporting. So, the couple comes home in the evening. How was your day? Oh, I had this meeting, and this meeting. I had to do this report. That's not how your day was. That's a
Hmm.
report of the day, right? And
Hmm.
so they think that they are still doing some connection when all they're doing is reporting to each other. That's a danger. So this might be a good time to talk about what I think are the three levels of connection because I think it might clarify
Hmm.
where people kind of
Okay.
fall apart. There are three levels or dimensions, and this doesn't mean you do one, then two, then three. It's there are three different levels that you see as three different bridges to the other person. The first one is physical. That's loving touch.
Hmm.
And I used to say that's touch, and I went, that's not right. It's loving touch, right? And loving touch, this way of connecting is what we share with warm blooded creatures. So my dog understands that. In the evening, she wants to be up against my leg. That's her feeling of physical connection, right? So that's nonverbal. It's loving touch. And when I say it, a lot of times people say, oh, you mean sex? And my response is,
Hmm.
that is one, but no, that's not it. It's hugs and kisses and holding hands and patting each other on the back and all of that loving touch. And I often watch people just disconnect on that they stop having those hugs and kisses and they stop being even in proximity of each other. So that's one level. The second level is emotional connection. That is verbal and nonverbal. We've been practicing some of that here. As I'm saying something, you're agreeing, you're nodding, and I'm doing the same, right? That's nonverbal. Okay, we're on the same page here because we do this in every relationship. But emotional connection in a marriage means that there are two pieces. There is we get each other and that we support each other. That's nonverbal. But we could also have those conversations about what's tough, what's great. That's emotional connection. Do I get you? Do you get me? Do I support you? Do you support me? Those two things. And there is spiritual connection.
Hmm.
Spiritual connection is entirely verbal. It's sharing. So you talked about you never knew what the hopes and dreams were with each other, with your ex, and that would be spiritual connection. The interesting thing is when those, and it usually is sharing about the family they came from, the background, what they learned from that, what values they have, what hopes and dreams and fears they have. Those are the deep areas in our life, the deepest part that we often don't just share with the world, but we can have particularly a deeper conversation with a spouse because we've built that. And because that is an area that a lot of people don't identify it, they don't realize that they had about two, three, maybe four of those conversations, and then they lock it away as if those values might not shift, those dreams might not shift, that there might be more of that to connect with. And they just go, well, we just don't have time for those deep conversations. So those three levels are important because it points to a couple of things. One is it points to where we have disconnected when that's happened.
Mhm.
Two, it points to places to go back to connection. And three, it just points to the fact that as connecting creatures are more connecting than probably any other creature on the planet.
I love those 3 levels. I've never heard of that.
So we'll just make it easy as physical, emotional, spiritual.
Okay.
And emotional has both verbal and nonverbal elements. So if you think about it as verbal,
Mhm.
as spiritual, that's totally verbal. Emotional is verbal and nonverbal, and then physical is nonverbal.
Yes. So that is how after I got divorced, like 2 years later, I fell in love for the first time in my life and dated a guy for a year, and I still remember this day like it was yesterday, and this was 2 years ago. How we connected and fell in love was through a spiritual
Mm,
deep connection, talking about our past and pain like immediately, and it was like we just connected. Whereas my ex-husband, I thought that he was, he said he was a Christian, raised a Christian, but I was a single mom. I was really in survival mode, and I
mhm,
saw red flags, and I still did it anyway because I thought I didn't deserve any better. And so there wasn't an emotional or spiritual connection. I accepted he's not going to lead me spiritually. He wasn't there yet, but I just settled and I did it anyway.
mm. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that people find themselves in that situation. I mean,
Mhm.
that it's rarely a pure reason for people to get married. There are lots of other pieces, and sometimes it's pressure from outside, and sometimes it's pressure from inside.
Mhm.
And we need to be aware of that. There are two pieces to this puzzle. One is, do we take the time to find the right person? And two is, do we then, once we're in that commitment, do we see if we can make it right, the
Mhm.
relationship right? Because the commitment is to the relationship. So let me give an example. This happened to my wife and me years ago. So we're both kind of quiet people anyway. We never have a loud argument, but we were having an argument or discussion, as we might refer to it.
Mhm.
And she left the room to go take care of laundry. And of course, I'm just kind of calculating in my head, going, oh, if I tell her this point, this point, and this point, she's going to see my point of view. I was in the I got to be right. And so I followed her and I had my finger up to make a point. And she said, before you say something, I just want to ask you a question. Is what you're about to say going to help the fact that we are committed to being in this for the rest of our lives or not? And I slowly put my finger down and said, nope, let's work on repairing that. We were honoring the commitment we made together that includes both of us. We both were solid about how we do that. And sometimes that's what you're struggling against.
Is not having both people solid with that commitment. You talk about stepping back and observing the relationship, which I love, getting an outside perspective, a more of like a bird's eye view. But most
Mhm.
people are too emotionally activated to do that. That was definitely me. How do you actually get someone out of reaction and into awareness in real time?
Yeah, people ask me what are some of the skills that people need going into a marriage is really some of the skills we need going into adulthood, like being able to emotionally regulate ourselves to and which first of all means that we're able to see that we're not in regulation. We're dysregulated, to use that clinical term. But am I in fight or flight mode? It's very difficult to have a we conversation when you are in fight or flight mode because fight or flight, it's about me.
Mhm.
I'm going to either get away from the threat or I'm going to take on the threat. That becomes very individual. So part of that, many times have been sitting with a couple going, you realize that you two are now locked in battle.
Mhm.
Can you
Totally
feel that?
activated.
Totally activated.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? And often neither one are aware of how that is because. So let's use anger as an emotion. Anger is not a primary emotion, it's a secondary
Mhm.
emotion. And anger comes outward when we feel inward hurt, fear, or threat.
Mhm.
We don't like to admit to hurt, fear, or threat as a human. So it's easier to use that outward piece of anger. Anger is repulsive. But if somebody were to say to me, I'm really hurt about this, that brings out a different response mechanism from people. I'm hurt. I want to help with that. I'm angry with you, I'm going to meet that with anger. So those are two very different approaches. And so part of people being able to, let's just use that example of anger, step back and first acknowledge that they're angry, and to be able to identify that as not a bad thing. It's the emotional state. And so asking the question, how can I regulate myself in that? How can I step back and say, you know what? I need 10 or 15 minutes to think about this. Let's talk about this in a little bit, to breathe a little bit. And that takes some awareness. So I've often pointed out to somebody, I'm watching you. Do you realize you're angry? No, I'm not. Okay. I'm watching your clenched fist. I'm watching your stomach is tense. You're breathing out of your
Mhm.
chest. Your face is red. Your veins are bulging. I mean, I can name lots of things. And sometimes people have to go, oh, that's what that means. And to be able
Yeah.
to say, yes, I am that. And so sometimes being able to say, yeah, I'm dysregulated is a little easier than going, yeah, I'm angry. And for a lot of people in our culture where we've been taught that, so there's something wrong with us if we're angry. Once I can recognize that, then I can ask the question, what do I want to do about that? I can express what I'm threatened about, what I'm hurt about, what I'm fearful about. Certainly in a marriage, in an intimate relationship, to be able to say, hey, I'm feeling really threatened by that right now. You're admitting to a feeling. That feelings aren't right or wrong, they just are.
Mhm.
And so if I feel that way, the question is what's going on. And so if I say, I'm feeling really hurt by that, it gives a chance for the person to go, oh, that's not what I meant at all.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of ways that we cook the story in our own minds that if we're able to talk about the hurt, the fear, the threat, we can check it out for a reality.
And the only person that's gonna change you is really yourself, and being
Yes.
super intentional about, first of all, being able to read yourself and your emotions, and this comes with personal growth and repetition. I love how Jim Rohn says, for things to change, you have to change. For things to get better, you have to get better. And so to be able to stop yourself, like you said, and really ask yourself, okay, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling hurt. It's coming out as anger. And being able to acknowledge and have that emotional regulation where you can just pause, take a deep breath. And I relate to this because I struggled with anger for a
Mm.
long time. So on the Enneagram, I'm an 8. And when we're triggered, we are prone to be angry, not guilty or anxious, as the other triads struggle with. And so I remember my mother telling me, Anna, you need anger management classes. And I remember thinking, I need to understand why I'm angry. And it was
Hmm.
because I was in a loveless marriage where I had no power, no control, no influence. Things weren't changing. The drinking wouldn't stop. And it made me really angry because I was hurt and I was threatened. I was frustrated. I was in fight or flight. And I'm a fighter. I will not back down. And I've learned to back down. Like God has told me, Anna, you don't have to give your energy to every single person. You don't have to
Right.
sign up for every fight. And so with the whole anger thing, what I didn't realize, and someone told me this and it changed my life, is you don't have to be angry. And anger is giving away your power. People think that by becoming angry, they have more control, they have more power, but really you're weak. Weakness is what is just portrayed loud and clear when you become angry because you're losing self-control and you feel like you have to have power over that person by becoming angry. When I realized all this stuff, I thought, oh my goodness, I need to stop giving my power away, being weak, and learn to communicate my emotions better and regulate them. And it's taken years for me to do this. It's baby steps every day, seizing every opportunity, especially with my teenagers, to take a hold of this moment, this golden moment where I either choose a better thing and work on my patience, or I just keep going back to that vicious cycle that I get sucked into. And the more
And
you do it, the easier it becomes because you're rewiring your nervous system.
that's exactly right. And our automatic response is that protective fight, flight, flee, flail is what I
Mhm.
talk about. Those mechanisms are designed to keep us alive. Like if I see a threat, to immediately go into protection mode is more likely to lead to my survival, not happiness, but survival, than if I just don't respond to the threat. And so those are in us. They just don't function well in our culture. I think we should do better in culture, period, but certainly in marriage, where the damage is done in those moments where we're activated and we don't stop it. And it's so quick. It's that instant flick that if we aren't aware of it, run the day and get us into more disconnection. And we create the wounds along the way.
So, for anyone listening and who is stuck in these anger loops or emotionally unregulated loops, a good thing for them to do would be able to write when they feel themselves being activated, which could be an increase of heart rate, maybe sweaty, maybe tenseness. You're not at rest. You feel that activation would be a good idea, would be just to push the pause button on yourself. If you have a hard time and you want to get out of this bad habit, habits are hard to break, but you can start by just zipping, like not responding, take a deep breath. Because 3 second buffer is a golden nugget. That's what's helped me is realizing even if I gave myself 3 seconds of silence and took a deep breath, that is what's helped me so much.
Yeah, there's a pause, and Viktor Frankl talks
Yeah.
about this. There's a pause in that reaction space, right, of where something happens and how I respond, and it's that pause that we can dig into. We A lot of people will say, "I can't help that," and my response is, "You've chosen not to attend to that little
Mhm.
space." But you're right. The 3 seconds, a deep breath. A lot of research shows that when we have an emotional spike,
Mhm.
if we allow it, just by our biology, allow it to pass, it's only a 90-second recovery time. Now we look at the research that shows that most humans take about 10 to 15 minutes to return to normal after that spike. I term that the difference between reactivity and responsibility. I can react, that is what I'm doing when I'm lashing out, or I can be choosing my responsibility. That is my choice of response. And that changes how we interact if we're willing to look at those signs. Activation is a much more neutral term for people to start with. Why am I activated right now? And usually, if I track it back, I can go, oh, my activation is telling me that I'm feeling hurt, fear, or threat. And if I'm
Mhm.
not careful, that's going to come out as anger. And I don't find that to be
Mhm.
helpful.
So, for men who are listening, and my clients often ask, what is emotional safety? What's emotional depth? This is a very helpful action step for you to take and to deepen your emotional depth and create emotional safety for a woman is to be able to stop when you're activated and ask yourself one simple question, which is, what am I feeling right now? That
Mm.
alone will start to create the snowball effect of creating more emotional safety.
Yeah, that is research definitely backs
Mhm.
what you just said. If we're able to classify it, we are
Mhm.
already establishing some control over it.
I love what you said earlier about when people are in fight or flight mode, that's helpful for survival, but not for happiness in a relationship. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier is when you have this couple who said, we're going to last because we have true love.
Mhm.
But they don't realize, and I mean, when I'm in a room with 5 people, like 3 or 4 people have already been divorced. And so it comes down to alignment. If you ask those couples, okay, let's go through the 7 pillars of life, 7 core pillars that I teach on about finance and profession and parenting. Would you say you're aligned in every area? Would you say you're compatible? If somebody would have done that with my ex and I, we would have been at a stop because he wouldn't even have been able to dig in and go, how do I feel about parenting and finances and goals? We would have had no work to do because there's like the lights on, but no one's home.
Mm.
And so if somebody would have taken us and said, hey, let's see how your alignment uh, score is, this is obviously not going to work. And this is what I teach people too and talk a lot about on social media is figure out if you're aligned with that person, if you're compatible. Because if you're not, if you're just attached to them, if you're just with them because of the potential, the chemistry, then you're looking at wasting the next 10 years of your life.
Yeah, and so if you're in connection and you're having
Mhm.
the conversation, for instance, when I talk with people about parenting, my thing is you're not going to parent 100% alike.
Mhm.
You're just not, and that's okay. But can you understand each other's perspective? And so an alignment in that may be that we are going to do some things differently, but I'm not going to undercut you. You're not going to undercut me. We're going to
Mhm.
support each other. We're going to find ways of making that about the kids. How do
Mhm.
we create kids?
That brings me actually to this next question. A lot of people stay and try to fix things for years. That was me. At what point does working on the marriage become self-abandonment?
Yeah, so that is a difficult question for people because sometimes we rationalize one way or the other, right? We rationalize that it's okay, I keep working on it, and there is a point when you say, I have done what is reasonable and what I'm willing to do. I will not sacrifice more. And when you do that, you can at least walk away going, I did what I could. Then there are those who, at the first sign of problems go, okay, I've done everything I can. I'm walking away. The space in between is that gray zone of going, am I working on this at my own sacrifice? So if you're giving up your boundaries, like you're allowing somebody to cross your boundaries,
Mhm.
that's a clear sign that you're now abandoning yourself. If there are some core values, some deeper values that are you don't agree on, and you're still trying to stay in, that's a clear sign. Many times people will discover that their values have shifted or they never had an alignment in those values and they are at odds with each other and there's no reconciling them. And if there is no reconciling them, to find out how to do that cleanly as you leave is important. So even if you go, yeah, I've done what I could,
Mhm.
the exiting can be less damaging than I see it often. There is that gray area of asking, have I crossed that point that is hard for an individual because we rationalize.
So if someone is doing all the right things, regulating themselves, communicating well, showing up differently, and their partner still doesn't respond, what does that actually tell us?
So there is a timepiece. I've had people who have been working on relationships for 10 plus years, and I'm just kind of going,
Mhm.
you need to call this. I mean,
Mhm.
there's too much damage done. So there's that. And then I've had people who are like, well, I've worked on it for 2 weeks. So I think I'm done here. That's two ends of the spectrum.
Mhm.
And so when you have done what you feel is what you're able to do, just to do a reality check. Is that true? Or am I at a moment of
Mhm.
frustration? Those are two different things. Do I make a decision on this or am I feeling frustrated with that? Two ways of viewing
Mhm.
that. If you say, yes, I'm ready to make a decision, that is likely to be when you have gotten to that point. There are times when the damage is just too much to recover. And
Mhm.
at that point, the question is, how do we leave this as healthily as possible?
I can completely relate because I think of my marriage. We were married for 13 years, and for probably 11 years, I really tried hard to
Mm.
do everything under the sun. We went to therapy, went to marriage counseling, met with the pastors. And when he wouldn't give up drinking and it was hurting our marriage, I found out about Celebrate Recovery. It's a Christ centered recovery program for
Mhm.
people with hurts, habits, and hangups. And so it was a part of my church. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go because I have hurts. And so I started going to Celebrate Recovery. It changed my life. And I asked my ex-husband, would you come with me to this program and we can get better together and work on ourselves and do the STEP program? And he came one time and he said, no, that's for people like you. And so I said, okay, well, this is the last basically ultimatum. I said, I've tried everything. I say, let's separate for 6 months physically and just take a breath of fresh air and stop fighting. And we both stopped drinking, and both go to Celebrate Recovery for a year. Let's try something different. That was a thing for me. I said, we need to try something different.
Mhm.
We've never stopped drinking like you. We've never gone to Celebrate Recovery. We've never really separated and tried to get better and start over dating each other. He said, no, I'm not doing any of that. So then I took that as, okay, that's my pass. There's nothing more I can do. I'm exhausted. And I hired a life coach and she was helping me start my own business, but she kept coming back to my marriage. This is an obstacle. So, Anna, this is your homework for the week. You pray about it. And you're either going to let this marriage go or figure out how you can make one last ditch effort. I
Mhm.
prayed about it and I had a peace that it was time to let it go after trying for 13 years. And I have never looked back. I've never regretted that. It's been hard for the children, of course. I have three, but I am a better version of myself because I was able to detach from that and start healing.
I find people are where they are. That is
Mhm.
where they are. And so sometimes it does take a long time and a lot of run ins to finally go, yeah, I really have done everything I'm willing to do. And I can walk away without regret. That is, for me, an important piece. And so when you start getting guidance from outside that, yes, I keep doing everything to change on my side and to create something, and there's no movement on the other side, there comes a point when you say, I'm no longer willing to try to cause the movement. I'm changing, I'm growing, and there's no movement on the other side. I have to accept that. And
Mhm.
that's a difficult question for anyone, but you named the thing that you had somebody on the outside going, you need to look at that, Anna. This is something that's in you.
All my close friends, so many people were like, Anna, what are you doing? And then after I
Yeah.
got married, they saw me change. And I wrote a song about it because I write country music. I wrote a song called Hollow, and it was about how that relationship
Mm.
hollowed me out. And I got small, I got quiet. Even though, yes, we argued, I stopped asking for things, I stopped wanting more. And he had this mentality that I took on, that if you want more, you're being selfish, you're being discontent. So just accept what's given to you and stop wanting more in life. And you take this vibrant, energy filled, childlike, free spirited bird like myself, and then it's like you put her in a cage and you just watch her shrivel up and die. And I lost myself in that marriage. And it's now 6 years, I think, that he moved out, where I feel like so much more free
Mm.
and
Mhm.
whole and healthy and happy and at peace. I've been single now for a year and I have never been happier.
The growth that came from that, that's an
Mhm.
incredible growing thing for you. Nobody wants to have to go through something hard to grow,
Mhm.
but the only way we grow is because things are in our way. Obstacles are in our way that we've
Mhm.
got to find a way through. And there are lots of people who will say, I spent too long. And my thing is, well, you are where you are. And where you are now is a result of that. You've gone through that. You've figured
Mhm.
out who you are and what you do. And that doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't erase those years. It just means that you've profited from that. You made it something you could grow from.
Yes, and all that pain turned into my ministry.
Hmm.
And when I realized how to heal and how to design my dream life and how to get set free, I thought I need to change this. I need to share this with other people.
Yeah.
And so I became a life coach and then eventually now a relationship coach, and more specifically, a relationship coach for men, because of this terrible dating spree I went on in Florida. And I realized these men need help. Oh my goodness. Like they don't know how to date, but that's another subject. So your framework focuses on changing yourself first. But what do you say to someone who feels like they've already done the work and they're just exhausted?
Yeah, so my framework actually has three C's to it. Change is one of them,
Hmm.
but it's changing because adults tend to stagnate in adulthood, period. So I'm not saying something's wrong with somebody that they need to change as much as we all need to get back on a growth path as adults. And there's always more growing to do for everyone. And that's why I can put that out as an absolute that people need to change because we stop showing up the same way, the way we want to in a relationship. But the other two are connecting and creating. So
Okay.
connecting with our spouse is restoring that connection. And so now we're going to pull in those three dimensions. Well, because people will say, so what am I specifically supposed to do? And I'm like, those three levels, a little bit more than what you're doing now. Not a lot more, but a little bit more to start building the path back. So that's the connection. The creating is creating a we. Like, how can I realize that I probably am not thinking we in terms of areas because that's what happens when you pull apart and you disconnect. So how can I begin to think in that way? So change is a piece of it, but it's not changing like I need to change to be who my spouse wants me to be as much as I need to change who I am to be more of who I need to be. I
Hmm.
need to be, not what they want me to be. That's a very different setup. So here's one of the tests. I often tell people, you fell in love with each other because of who you are.
Hmm.
And if you're having to change who you are at a core level to match that, you've got a deeper problem. You feel like you're forced into a change. That's another one of those red flags.
So you're saying if somebody else is trying to change you into their perfect version of you, that's the dangerous part.
That's the dangerous part.
Okay. I was thinking too how important it is for people to know that when you do change, it needs to be for yourself and yourself
Hmm.
alone, because
Yeah.
people who tend to change for other people, it stops at some point because you
Yeah.
realize it's not worth it changing for this person. Maybe they don't respond to you the way that you want to respond, or you're not getting something out of it. That's why it's so important to change for no other person than yourself.
Yeah. 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 The growth needs to be about who you need to be and who you truly are. So
Mhm.
I'm often asking people, like, who are you designed to be? Like, what is that within you? That's who you need to move towards, not who you think they want you to be. Because by the way, you're likely to misread that. And by the way, that puts control over your life into somebody else's hands, and that never
Mhm.
works real well. And by the way, you're not likely to actually stick that change. That's going to be you
Mhm.
pretending to be a certain way to try to pass what they want. that's never going to get you where you need to be.
Right. That's called performance. And that makes me think of one of my favorite quotes is that nobody will care for your dreams the way that you do.
Mm.
And if you don't design your life, somebody else will do it for you and you won't like the way it looks. And that hit me hard because I thought that's why I have to be self-employed. That's why I have to have
Mhm.
my own so that I have time freedom and money freedom and can do whatever I want. So would you agree that if you're not growing, you're regressing, or is there like a neutral?
I don't think there is a neutral. Ray
Mhm.
Kroc, one of my favorite quotes is, "You're green and growing or ripe and rotting." And I
Mhm.
think that we are designed from birth to grave to be growing. That's just
Mhm.
built into us, and it stops then. It stops when we die. So we're constantly in a place of growing, and that doesn't mean you're constantly everything about yourself, but growing into who you truly are
Mhm.
and finding your gifts, finding your skills, finding how you fit in, finding how your values are more important in your life as you go on. How do you find meaning and purpose? All of those pieces are just growth pieces that take us all the way to the grave.
Mhm. I haven't heard of that quote that you just said, but I love that because it makes me think of a tree or a plant. It's never just staying the same. It, like you said, it's always growing. Maybe it's a millimeter every day,
Hmm.
or it's slowly dying. But even if you decide just little by little baby steps, hey, today I'm going to try and not have the last word. Today I'm going to try and not react to my teenager. I'm going to try to like go all day long without judging a soul. I used to gossip till something happened to me and I heard a recording of three people talking about me. And I thought, like, I will never gossip again. So you choose these difficult times in your life to level up just a little bit more, just raise the bar. I love what Jim Rohn says too. He says, I'll work on me for you, and you work on you for me. We work on ourselves. If it's not working, you got to do something different.
Yeah.
Do you think modern relationships fail more because people give up too early or because they stay too long in dynamics that were never right to begin with?
Well, that's a big question. We still have people staying too long and
Mhm.
people who are bailing too fast. And so I think it's a very individual place to be. But
Mhm.
one of the things that has shifted, I think, in culture is what people are expecting out of a relationship. One of the rising expectations is that a spouse will support my self expansion. That doesn't mean self growth. They'll support me going to therapy and growth seminars, but do they just support me exploring my world? That expectation has just shows an upward spark as the decades I've been working have gone on. And I don't think that's going to change. That expectation that we are needing to support each other in becoming more fully who we are is an important part. And if that's not happening,
Mhm.
that is a sign that we've got a problem. If I can't be more and more of myself,
Mhm.
that's a problem in the relationship. That's not a, I can tell you how you need to change as much as I will support you growing as a person, period.
Mhm.
How you need to do that, I can't make that call. There's a difference between the green flag of supporting someone's self expansion and the red flag of me saying, here's how you need to change because I wouldn't want that. So it's a support their self expansion, not controlling their self expansion.
I love that I was able to experience this only once in my life, but to be with somebody who does support your expansion, your dreams, your goals, to champion you. I didn't even know that people like that existed.
Yeah.
My ex-husband, when I had an idea, and maybe to start a homeschooling website because I homeschooled all three of my children for most of their childhood, start my own business, whatever it was, he would not support my ideas. And it made me feel inferior and invisible and not having any value or worth. And so when I end up in this other relationship, it's like, yeah, Anna, let's make it happen, whatever it is. You want to start a podcast or write a book, write music. I believe in you. And when you have just one person even believing in you, it's just the most beautiful thing that I think any creature could ever experience. And it's sad to me that a lot of relationships don't have this dynamic. And of course, I would do the same, believe in him, support his ideas and his endeavors. So I just encourage anyone who's listening, like if you're in a relationship where you don't have that emotional support and somebody believes in you and champions you, then you're missing out.
Yeah. There's a lot of research that's coming out. The term that's being used is mattering. Do I
Mhm.
feel like I matter?
Mhm.
And there's a part of that that is internal, and then there's a part that is external. Do I feel like I matter to my spouse? There are two pieces. Do I feel like what I'm doing is important? Do I feel like I'm contributing, that I'm making a
Mhm.
difference? but am I getting feedback about that? And that's what you're describing. You were trying to find ways of going, this is important stuff to me. This is what matters to me.
Mhm.
And having someone say, yeah, that doesn't matter. That's a
Oh,
very
so true.
deflating place to be, as opposed to
Mhm.
someone who goes, absolutely, and let you run your course. And one of the things I did get as a child was what was important to me mattered to my parents. And so they let me
Mm.
explore all kinds of different things. And I went, so when I started reading the research, I went, oh, that's what that felt like. I have a term for that.
Mhm.
That's feeling like it matters.
Mhm.
So that's what makes the difference. Do I matter to my spouse? The more we
Mhm.
feel that, the healthier we are.
I have not thought about it in that aspect before and regarding my ex. I did not feel like I mattered. I didn't feel like my ideas mattered. I didn't feel like he even dipped his toe into my world. There was never like, "Hey, Anna, what are your goals this year? What are your
Mhm.
dreams? Where do you want to
Yeah.
travel?" Didn't do family vacations. And they say for alcoholics, they don't know how to have a relationship with themselves, God, or other people, right? So they're never facing themselves or digging deep and saying, what do I want? Who am I? What do I value? What are my standards? There was never those conversations. And it's wild because I'm the opposite of that. Is it possible that focusing on saving the marriage is sometimes the wrong goal, and the real goal should be becoming the kind of person who no longer tolerates a misaligned relationship?
Yes, there are times when you find a toxic person. And so that is one of those times when you
Mhm,
truly find somebody who's toxic. That's an immediate, at that
mhm,
point, it becomes either emotionally or physically abusive in some way, right? You're
mhm,
the dismissive even is abusive. So that's a clear sign. There are also times when the toxicity has invaded because of that disconnection to the point that it has become the obstacle, right? The
mhm,
toxicity is so high that continuing to operate in that is toxic. And so being able to acknowledge that is important. Either I found a
mhm,
toxic person or we've created toxicity in our relationship that cannot be healed, that there's no
mhm,
no path for us to do that we're willing to do. If you continue through either of those, you are doing damage to yourself
mhm.
and not doing anything to further the relationship.
And you're also just repeating unhealthy patterns. Nick, can you name some traits of a toxic relationship? Because I've seen relationships that clearly to me are toxic. One of the people would say, oh, no, this isn't a toxic relationship because toxic to them sounds wild and chaotic and crazy, right? So,
Mhm.
what are some signs or traits of a toxic relationship?
Two big ones are disrespect and disdain. Those are
Hmm.
very clear when you're seeing somebody who just has disdain for somebody, that they're um, outwardly hostile in how they treat them, think about them, look at them. But disrespect is too. Like, I'm not going to pay attention to what you want. I'm going to put you down. I'm going to always want it to be my way. Those are two
Hmm.
very clear signals of that. So, first of all, if somebody has disdain and disrespect, period, as a person, you found a toxic person. If the relationship begins to bring in toxicity between you, you often see that it's both ways. The disrespect and the disdain is two-sided. And so you've reached a toxic level that's also dangerous.
What about something like lying? I know that could be a form of disrespect, but you might also find somebody who has grown up just kind of lying about stuff, withholding information, finding loopholes.
It
I'm talking
shows that,
about somebody
right?
who lies though consistently, like
And
daily.
if that's a different
Yeah.
category, like if they are lying because they are trying to avoid their own
That's
are toxic layers, and that usually has to do with some narcissism for sure.
mhm,
So your other one is addiction. So
mhm,
addiction usually comes from people who come from wounded backgrounds. John Bradshaw's thing years ago, the hole in the soul still stands, that we're still trying to find something to fill the spot.
mm,
That said, we humans tend to have propensities for addictions, whether it's sugar or caffeine or nicotine or
mhm,
whatever. But those aren't the same as what we're talking about when somebody is doing something to duck reality, which is where
mm.
drinking or drugs come in, where you're
Or
trying to
porn.
dull
Yeah.
how, or porn,
Mhm.
or gambling, or something that is your escape route when things get tough.
There's a huge difference for people who have addictions that the thing that they're doing is hurting the relationship, and mainly because it's numbing their reality.
Mhm.
They're just doing it to feel different. And like you said, sometimes they're doing it, I forgot what you said, but that's just their norm now. It's like they're just drinking because this is their norm and they
Yeah.
don't see any other way. And what would be beneficial for them would be to stop drinking for 6 months or whatever to see who they are. I remember my ex saying he would stop drinking if he knew it would help our marriage, but that was just like an excuse.
What he was saying was, I know it won't help my marriage, so there's no reason for me to stop.
Yes, that's what he
Right?
was
That's
saying, is that it's not gonna help my marriage, so I'm not gonna stop, but we
yeah.
never knew because he never tried for more than I think it was like 3 weeks. For anyone listening, if they are unsure if they're in a toxic relationship, which is a relationship that's gonna be very hard to save, if you have disrespect, disdain,
Yep.
dishonesty, and addictions that are preventing connection or depth in the relationship, just something to think about if you're wondering if you're in a toxic relationship. Lee, is there anything else, any more nuggets of wisdom that you want to impart to my listeners before we leave?
If you want a quick start on this is to change the mindset to team. That is one of the big
Mhm,
things that everything else starts to stack in the right order. If we go, okay, I'm on the team. How can I be
mhm,
on the team? How can we be as a team? And having a conversation of, you know what? It doesn't feel like we're acting much as a team. How could we do
mhm.
that better? Would be a huge step into the process.
What does it look like when somebody's not on a team? Because I know some people will be listening to this and thinking, I'm on a team. But
Mm.
when somebody says to them, this is what it looks like to not be on a team, maybe it'll open their eyes to be like, actually, I don't do those things. So maybe I'm not on a team.
Yeah, so the one of the hallmarks of a good team is that both people are playing at their capacity at that moment. That doesn't mean that we're at our top capacity all the time, but we're playing at our capacity that we have at the moment, as opposed to going, I'm overplaying or underplaying, or
Hmm.
I'm out to win and show that I'm the better player.
Hmm.
That's a problem on a team. So making sure that you're aiming for the win together, like we're going to win at this
Hmm.
life thing by supporting each other. That's what a team looks like, a good
Hmm.
team, right? So that kind of rounds around to those what are considered to be problem areas. For instance, when people are struggling around money, a lot of times it's because they're arguing about who has what, like what's mine, what's yours, rather
Hmm.
than our money. A team approach is our resource. And that is the reality, for instance, of money. There's money coming in and there's money going out of a household. That's it. How you set it up, it's irrelevant to the thought process behind it of our resource. Our parenting together would be another area. Our families, our extended families. I'm just naming these battle points for people. Do we see it as what's wrong with your family, or these are our families that we've joined? How are we going to be a team interacting with them? There are other areas, but basically is how do we deal with those big topics in life? Do we see that as we're in this together on this? Or do
Hmm.
we go to our sides of the ring to try to duke it out and be the
Hmm.
right one?
So let's end with a basketball analogy because I just went to a Mavericks game with my son Maverick a couple weeks ago, our first professional basketball game, and it was so much fun. But as I'm watching them play, it just made me think of what you were talking about, how being a team, it's like when you pass the ball to the other person, you're giving them an opportunity to communicate. And you want to not just keep the ball. Keeping the ball would be like you always have the last word. You hijack the conversation. You only care about what you're saying. You only want to listen to yourself speak instead of sharing the ball back and forth and running with each other across the court. And then even like doing like an alley oop, which I just learned about, I think yesterday, was when you pass the ball to someone and they can jump up and put it in the basket. That's teamwork when you're supporting the other person and you're setting them up for success and you're saying, here's the ball. I want to hear what you have to say. Here's the
Mhm.
ball. You go make a basket.
I'm setting you up to win.
So good. How can people find your app and your books and all that and your social media?
The app is designed for people who did hit the pause button, and that's at unpauseyourmarriage.com because that's what you're trying to do is hit the unpause on that. But you may realize that you're closer to the waterfall than you meant to be, and you really hear the rumble of disaster, and that would be Save the Marriage, and that's at savethemarriage.com. If you go to savethemarriage.com, there's also my podcast, and there's also a link to my books there. So if you're
Okay.
ready to unpause, what I like about a app is it will remind you, and that's what we're trying to change is the system, the
Mhm,
habits, pattern, the
mhm,
routine, and that app can remind you about doing your exercises each day to work on that. Save the marriage is when you are in trouble and you need to
mhm.
find a way to deal with that immediately. So unpauseyourmarriage.com or savethemarriage.com if you're at a worse place.
Well, Lee, it was such a pleasure having you on, and I
Well,
really
thanks for having me.
appreciate everything that you shared with my listeners.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, aloha.